Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. With me is my guest, Krys Copeland, joining us from the Netherlands.
Hi, Reverend Don. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you. And today we're going to talk about things happening at Corellian Publishing.
Yeah,
And we want to talk about, well, why don't you start us out?
I think everyone in America and a lot of people around the world today are feeling a lot of shock, maybe even some grief, fear, um, anxiety, and I think it's important that we talk about that, especially as it relates to Witch Wars in general.
Hmm.
And of course, we've just published Witch Wars 2, Defense Manual, How to Win.
Hmm.
And a lot of people are feeling like they've lost a Witch War today. Um, and
We want to say hello to Reverend Michael in the chat room.
Hi, Reverend Michael. Good to see you. Um, and I am definitely feeling that as well today. I
Hmm.
know if people follow me on my social media, especially on Facebook, um, you've seen my posts, my comments on other people's posts. This is
Hmm.
concerning in regards to Project 2025.
Hmm.
And because we know it's their playbook, so we need to pull out our playbook now.
Yeah,
And
we
I
need to
believe that,
create a playbook.
yeah, exactly. Witch Wars 1 and 2 are both good starts to
Yes.
playbooks on this. I do think that that is just a start for sure, but it will get people started with defense in this situation,
Well,
and
well,
it's
both Witch Wars 1 and Witch Wars 2 were written in a lot of ways in direct response um, to the rise of Christian nationalism and from an inside perspective, which is something a lot of people don't have. Yes, of course, they were focused on Witch Wars, but they talk about a lot of other relevant things, including um, well, what's going on in the wider world. The Witch Wars number two, in particular, focuses on changes in technology and how that affects all of this. They both focus on strategies for how to survive and prosper, even in the face of opposition. And it is true. Many people in many different minority communities are very worried at this point, as they should be. But it doesn't entirely change anything because Project 2025 and the rise of Christian nationalism was going to be there no matter what.
yeah,
And I've been trying to say that for months now. Well, really for years.
yeah,
Um, I and even more Ed the Pagan have watched this movement growing all our lives. And they have been extremely um, successful in the end with their long term strategies. And really, the only way for a minority religion like ours to effectively thrive in this world is our own long term strategies and understanding how to um, how to maintain what we have as much as we can and how not to be overwhelmed by the world. And in my opinion, one of the most important things is not to lose our composure, not to assume the worst, but to deal with what actually is happening. And we want to say hello to Timothy Gallagher in the chat room,
hi,
who
Timothy.
describes themselves as being careful to just remain a wallflower, sticking with boundaries. And at an individual level, I think maybe even in general, I think there's a lot to be said for that. I also think there's a lot to be said for local focus. And we are putting a lot of emphasis on our elder care ministry, which is focused here in Danville, um, in Blue, Illinois. Um, but I think all of us need to be looking at our local communities and how to strengthen them, how to strengthen our resources, how to strengthen our resilience, and how
Independence
to,
too.
yeah, it is one of the effects of the changes happening in the world is likely to be a more feudal type of situation. Um, I do strongly suspect we're going to hear a lot less about states' rights in the immediate future than we have in the immediate past. But the fact remains that certain states are in certain mindsets and others are in different ones. And how we deal with this depends largely on where we're at. Um,
And what you're talking about with ways that we can react to this right now, I think we could learn a lot from the Palestinian resistance movement of 1989. It was called the Intifada, the resistance.
mhm,
And if no one has seen the Wanted 18, it's a wonderful movie that describes a lot of the work that went into that resistance, and it started with becoming independent from
mhm,
Israeli products.
mhm,
Now, of course, a lot of it did not work because, of course, the Intifada, at least on the surface, ended. There's
mhm.
certainly still a resistance movement there and all over the world now because of Israel's actions in Gaza. But we can learn a lot from that. It involves growing our own food. It involves finding our own resources for electricity and water and things like that. If we have the resources to do so, we should be doing that. And if we can share those resources with our pagan neighbors, we should be doing that as well, especially as times become more difficult for us.
I do inherently agree with that. We want to say hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room, and we want to say hello to Arlene Bear in the chat room.
Hello, Reverend
Um,
Arlene. Hello, Reverend Mary.
and
And
Timothy
Steve.
says that they live in Oregon. Um, and we want to say hello to Steve Taylor in the chat room. And, I think, I mean, I think we have to be careful what examples we follow and make sure they were successful. However, we also have to look at when they're not successful, why. And very
Uh-huh.
often it's due to infighting among would be leaders.
In this particular situation, it had nothing to do with infighting until much later on. That did become an issue. But the original issue that led to some difficulty with the Intifada movement was the fact that a lot of them stopped paying their taxes to
Hmm.
Israel. And under the law, you have to pay your taxes to your
Hmm.
governing country, regardless of whether that country should be legal or not. That's a different topic. But when they began fully breaking that law,
Hmm.
that's when they became subject of attack. We saw
Hmm.
that similar thing with and the terrible part about it is that it doesn't work in reverse. Like Israel does not have to pay taxes. Israeli citizens who buy goods from Palestine do not have to pay taxes to Palestine. There's no
Hmm.
tax authority in Palestine currently because there's no real government in
Right.
Palestine currently. Um, and so, if the oppressor government is continuing to, take from the oppressed can stand up, but they have to do so very, very carefully.
Yes. And I would also say that when the option of a two-state solution was on the table, they should have took it. Um, and to some extent, all that has followed came from their insistence on getting everything they wanted and unwillingness to take part. And I think we need to be mindful of that too. Um,
I think that the reason that because I've had the same discussion as well with
mhm,
my Palestinian students that I have,
mhm,
and the reason that they chose not to take it was because they didn't trust Israel to keep their word, which
mhm,
I agree. I don't think Israel would keep their word. I think that they would continue with the daily harassment, the daily targeting of Palestinian citizens like they do every day. That didn't change in all that time that Palestine, willingly went through the Nakba, willingly got kicked out of their own land for their own protection, to save their own lives. And Israel continued for the next 60 years to interfere with their daily lives in some really shocking and horrific ways, and continue to do that every day to this day, even in West Bank. For
Well,
example, some of my students, they have to go through multiple checkpoints every day for hours
mm,
at a time. They get asked these intrusive, invasive questions, and they're just children. They're just trying to go to
mm.
school. They're just trying to hang out with their friends and have a good life. They don't know anything about this political stuff going on, and yet they're still targeted because they're teenagers.
Well, and I don't necessarily want to focus on any one situation because this has happened. This kind of thing happens all over the world. I mean,
Yeah.
this is similar to what happened in Germany in the 30s. Um, I think many of our um, people of color in the United States will tell you it was happening here at that same time. Because
Native Americans
these
as well.
are, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, these are things that um, are very important to recognize as not being specific necessarily. And hello to Jennifer Weird Witch in the chat room.
Hello, Jennifer.
Um, Limited to any one situation. And that brings us back to the Witch Wars Defense Manual because it's about strategies, not necessarily individual situations, though it gives individual situations as examples.
Yes.
Um, but the question is, what does one do? And, for me, um, and, I am not addressing partisan issues. I'm addressing Christian nationalism, which is not limited to one party, which I think is something a lot of people don't understand. Um, but to me, their continuing rise in power doesn't change inherently anything that I stand for or that I do. I was celebrating same sex marriages long before they had any legal standing in this country, all the way back in the 1980s. And will continue to do that regardless of what may happen in the future. I have been um, strongly in support of racial and gender equality my whole life. That's not going to change. Um, I am surprised how many are not, but I guess I'm not either, really. Um, so, what this means to us is what do we do? And in a lot of ways, the Witch Wars Defense Manual, I think, is perfectly timed for the world we're in. But, we've been talking about this. Project 2025, the rise of Christian nationalism, here and other parts of the world, for months now. And the one thing that is not really here is surprise.
Yeah.
Um, Nor is that agenda necessarily completely accomplished, but it certainly will be moving forward. We have to expect it will be moving forward. And what do? Well, we certainly continue to stand for what we feel is right. And hello to Witch Rising in the chat room. It's good to see you.
Hi, Witch Rising.
And Witch Rising has a lovely photo of the Samantha statue from Salem, Massachusetts,
Oh,
in
nice.
their profile. And that reminds us of a different time, because in the years when Bewitched was being filmed, there were great advances in civil rights. It was a much more hopeful time in some ways, even though it was not exactly a peaceful time. And one of the things that is important to remember about the Bewitched television program is that although it was ostensibly about magic and witchcraft and fantasy, it was really about civil rights, particularly for the LGBTQ community, and also racial equality expressed through that guise. And yeah,
We
that's
have
kind of important. We want to say hello to Brian, John, Ellicott Cook, and Magical Cloud. And
hi,
Magical Cloud
Brian,
is joining us from Belgium.
and hi, Magical Cloud. Oh, you're a neighbor of mine. Good, nice to see you in here, Magical Cloud. I'm in the Netherlands.
So the Witch Wars Defense Manual talks about, both 1 and 2, talk about strategies that you can use, whether you're in a witch war in the pagan community, um, which sometimes comes to us unasked for, or whether you're looking at the wider society. The same human traits are always there. Most of the same behaviors are there. If someone is trying to libel you across the board, what do you do? The book talks about that. It gives a very specific example in the Corellian Succession War, which was heavily about one side trying to libel the other, and what was done, because the libeling side did not win that confrontation. Um, these are things we can apply. And hello to Martin in the chat room. It's good to see you, Martin.
Hi,
Although I'm
Martin.
sure you've seen Martin more recently than we
He's 2 rooms away right now. So yeah.
have. But one of the things that I would like to emphasize is that the Witch Wars Defense Manual is not only applicable to witch wars, nor, for that matter, was the second volume necessarily written with only that in mind. And it says right up front that it's using the term witch war for a style of conflict,
Yeah.
which can be in any kind of situation. And hello to Ed the Pagan in the chat room.
Hi, Ed the
Speaking
Pagan.
of witch wars,
Yeah.
the author is with us.
Yes.
Um, and
And
it,
Timothy in the chat, he mentions that learning how the legal system functions is fascinating. And Ed talks a lot about the legal issues that
mhm,
come up with witch wars throughout the book, and
yeah,
how to avoid them, as well as how to
mhm,
confront them if you're ready to take that step.
yeah,
And he has some experience with it
yes, he
because
does.
he has been sued before, and
Hmm.
luckily he successfully. I don't know if it was won or just dropped, but he was not.
It's in the
Held
book.
liable in that situation. Yeah, he goes into a lot of detail in it in the book.
And Edward says reputational conflict,
Yes.
which is I would say the main thrust of the book, but also the way most political conflict happens in the absence of outright violence.
Yeah.
Now, in the end, violence is always the most effective technique, most regrettable, but most effective.
Yeah.
But luckily, we don't have as much of that here as in some other places in the world at present. And so we can still be fighting politically and reputationally for the things that we care about, and not bombing each other every day.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see if that eventually comes. I've talked about how when I was young, people were worried about the local shopping center being bombed, and I'm talking about here in Danville. I can remember my mother not wanting to go to Champaign for shopping because she was afraid there might be a terrorist attack, because that sort of thing was happening in out of the way places. The mere fact that it was tiny little Champaign didn't mean that it was an impossible thing. Um, and we deceive ourselves in thinking violence cannot happen that way here. It has, and anyone from any minority community can tell you that all of our minority communities have experienced overt violence within the last 100 years. Um, and to assume that that cannot be something that could return to us is foolish, but it hasn't returned to us yet, at least not at that level. I mean, I know I have to say, when I went to Nashville Pagan Pride, people were worried that there might be a U-Haul full of Nazis show up, which is certainly a threat of violence. but they did not. And I think that we must not assume that we're moving from, for want of a better way to put it, a Cold War to a hot war just yet. Nor must we assume that our legal options are no longer there. Of course, they are still there at this time. Um, and so knowing how to work with those things is going to be important. The other thing that I've pointed out regarding Project 2025, there are, oh, and Reverend Mary says, we had a whole plan for the Nazis. Well, yes, they did. Um, but the Nazis did not come, although they have been all over Nashville, apparently. But I was going to say that um, the importance of confronting these issues is in no way lessened, but there are still many ways of doing it. And when we talk about Project 2025, when we talk about the Heritage Foundation, when we talk about Christian nationalism, the biggest mistake we can make is thinking that we're talking about a particular political party. We are not. They have made inroads into both of the major parties, and there are other minor parties that they're even more powerful in. And we need to be mindful of that. Um, and I will also add for you, their ultimate goal is a constitutional convention, which will allow them to change the Constitution. Um, and they have been saying that for at least 50 years at this point. And so we need to be mindful of that as something that is likely to be brought up in the near future.
Yeah, and I think
And
we were talking about this earlier about how none of the parties really represent pagans very well.
no,
No,
no.
none of them follow pagan ideals. None of them follow pagan values. None of them really actively care about the environment, except for perhaps the Green Party, and their plans don't work.
Mhm.
So even if they had the passion for it, they don't
Yes.
have the means to accomplish anything.
Well,
And
this is
that's
a very important point.
yeah,
Um, and it's true not only, I mean, there are certain, particularly certain politicians and certain parties that are more beneficial to all of the various minorities, but none of them has been really that strong a defense overall. Some more than others, but the time for us to rely upon ourselves, I think, is very much at hand. Whether we're talking about the pagan community, um, people of color, um, other minority religions, the LGBTQ community, we all need to be relying on what we can do for ourselves and
yeah,
not what anyone else might do for us. And hopefully we can all be allies.
yeah. Anyone who is against Christian nationalism is now a target. So the enemy of my enemy should be my friend, and we have to stop this bickering between ourselves and start pulling together. We
Yeah.
have so much more in common than we have different. And one of those things that we have in common is that we believe in human rights. We believe in rights for Mother Earth. We believe that these are sacred and universal, and that they belong to everyone.
Hmm.
Um, and there are certain people that don't believe that,
Hmm.
and those would not be, in my opinion, pagans.
Now, the other thing that I would say is we want to remember we are magical people, and we do believe in the ability to influence things magically and energetically. And I am reminded, and people who are familiar with Corellianism will know, how the Five Mystic Secrets came into being as a book in response to the rise of the New Right back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And a lot of people thought that some of these things were going to happen then. But the politicians that they were backing chose not to do it when they actually came to office. Um, Will that happen now? It doesn't seem terribly likely, but you never know.
Yeah.
Um, it is reasonable to assume, and hello to Maggie Delayata in the chat room. It's good to see you, Maggie.
Hello, Maggie. Good to see you.
That many of the politicians who might be mouthing certain things may still be the weasels they've always been, and may not be so quick to actually do it. And I think that it is wise for us to put our political as well as our magical and spiritual energy toward trying to promote that as well. Um, but and I can't help but think that there are two different things here. One is the Christian nationalist agenda, and the other is the corporatist agenda, and they are not the same. They may, to some extent, be allied, but they are not the same. The corporatist agenda is just about money, and money-based agendas are predictable and can be dealt with.
Christian nationalism is about power. Money helps with that,
Yeah,
and they
it
certainly
does.
go after money in order to spread their goals. But it's not necessarily, you're right, it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos, for example, I wouldn't say he's a Christian nationalist. I would say he's
No, he wants as much money as he can get. Which, of course, an entire generation was taught back in the 80s. Um, and the agendas of those two movements are not necessarily going to stick together very long. They might not. So there are lots of things to look at here. And I see a lot of people feeling very hopeless today
Yeah.
who may be moving a little fast in making that assumption. But that we need to continue to fight any attempt to make one religion the established religion of the state, to
Yeah.
fight Christian nationalism, to fight Project 2025. That would have been true no matter how this election went.
We can, feel sorry for ourselves today. We
Mhm.
can hang our heads and cry, and that's okay. We can have our emotions.
Mhm.
But then tomorrow we need to put on our big boy shorts and our big girl shorts, and we need to get to work.
And if you want to learn how to do that, I highly recommend the Witch Wars Defense Manual Volumes 1 and 2, which you can get from CorellianPublishing.com.
And
now,
5 Mystic Secrets as well. I think
well,
that's
that's true.
another good one to add, especially for spiritual defense.
Yes, indeed. And now we must take a moment for a word from our sponsors, because we love our sponsors, and they keep us going. Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours. And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. Our next auction will be Sunday, November 10th at 11 a.m. Central Time. And this will be a larger auction than we've done previously, perhaps a super auction. And so we hope you will join us for that, with the proceeds going to support our elder care ministry through the Corellian Community Church. And with that, we've kind of come to the end of our time. But for me, my last comment today is that while the world is different today than it was yesterday, but that would have been the case no matter what, we are the same.
Yes.
And our ultimate goals are the same. And the things that we must focus on are the same. And we must continue to do that next right thing and do it to the best of our ability. And that would be my message to people. And do you have any final comment, Chris?
I think my message is to people is to stay guarded, but also open to hope. This
Yes.
is not the end. Um, it's just going to be a change for us, and our ancestors have gone through similar things. We'll call on them to help us during this time and to get us through it, and we'll help each other through this as well.
Yes, indeed. And with that, let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Thank you, Krys, for joining us, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to be with us and guide us as we go forward and help us to do those next right things. Help us to find the most successful ways to advance our beliefs and causes in this world and to build the future we want to see. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks. Knowing you are always with us, from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And may you be blessed now and always. And I will see you tomorrow. And Krys, we will see you next week.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.